So we've been talking a lot about growth and what it takes to scale brands in today's landscape. And you can't do that without building a team. And it's one of the things that rarely gets talked about. And we have talked about sort of like this war on talent, but we haven't really changed how we're going about building teams, where we find talent. And we have a panel here that's deeply entrenched in what the future of work looks like. And their message to all of us is that the future of work is here. The so-called war on talent is still raging, but the fight for employees continues to rely on sort of the same hiring practices and retention strategies that we've been using for decades. And especially, I think when you get to that point where you're scaling and you take money from investors, and then the first thing they have you do is go hire a recruiter to start filling positions. Most of you have gone through that and you know how it ends. Sometimes it works out, most of the time it doesn't. Sometimes you get lucky. But we have entrepreneurs on the panel. We also have someone who is deeply entrenched with Gen Z, lives with them every day. So I really want to start this panel with kind of setting the stage and getting one idea on how you guys think people should rethink their perspective on how they work and how they build teams. And Meloney, I'm going to start with you. So as the Associate Dean at SCAD, you're hardwired into what makes Gen Z tick. And from this perspective, like, what do we need to rethink? They're a mystery to a lot of us.
Yeah, I mean, I came from Estee Lauder as an executive director, and I worked in travel retail and Estee Lauder, the brand, and I sat on the 40th floor, and I remember we having these big meetings about what do millennials want in Gen Z. And then eventually, when I started the Business of Beauty and Fragrance program at SCAD, I got a chance to see that. I mean, they're in my building, I live with them, I talk to them on a daily basis, and what I have to say is you have no idea what's coming for you. It is a dynamic generation. I think that they are very brave, and it's more nuanced than the stereotypes that are out there right now. So as we think about the future of organizations and how we work, I would say you have to rethink the way that we form our organizations. This program is a testament, the Business of Beauty and Fragrance BFA program is a testament to the growth of this industry and how dynamic it is, and the fact that we need like multi-dimensional talent in the industry. But that talent, and great talent it is, needs to be in an environment where it can thrive. And so we have to relook at organizations and how we structure it. I look at the film industry sometimes, and I think that they have tapped into something. When you film a movie, you hire your actors, you hire your cast, and then when the project's done, you disband, and then you hire for the next movie. I think that model, especially in the startup area, might work very well. And also, the bigger companies like the Estee Lauders, L'Oreals, and Cody's can also rethink how they use their organization to develop talent. And I think they need the space without this kind of linear hierarchy that we put in place, or functional hierarchy. Just because you're marketing doesn't mean you're not good at finance, and just because you're a designer doesn't mean you're not good at marketing, as you guys all know as founders. So I think we need to rethink how we structure.
Yeah. I mean, in April, what you're building at the board kind of taps into the opposite end of the generational talent pool. And so sort of same question for you, like what do we need to rethink? Because what you've created is, first of all, I wish it was around when I was consulting. But it is sort of, part of building these multi-generational teams that's not easy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we had our pre-meet, I loved this idea of casting a movie, and I think I spent 25 years in fashion, and then 5 years in tech, and then 5 years in beauty. And you look back at those, kind of broken org chart models that we all adopted. And your point of when an investor says, go and hire the team, it's really hard to get a bunch of silver bullets. And for me, it's really right talent at the right time. And I think it's not about filling an org chart with titles and reporting structure. It's really, what do you need right now to get from here to here? And so the board is a community of fractional consultants that have left big companies, fashion, tech, beauty, wellness, CPG, who have really kind of tapped out in terms of top of the C-suite, where it's either toxic cultures or you've just kind of done what you can do and have moved into this space, quite frankly, to have more impact across more companies and to really help companies build. And so we create kind of a mashup where we can really connect talent to brands for what they need at that time. So project-based, if you think about who do you really need fully loaded on a P&L, at what stage of that business, and for sure there's many jobs that have to be fully invested, but there's so much talent and so much knowledge that can be tapped for like a 3-month, a 6-month, a 12-month project that brings exponential value, because the reality is they're just focused on that. And as we all know, once you're on the other side of the P&L, you are in the culture and you're managing teams, and a lot of your day is spent doing that versus potentially hitting some of these KPIs fully focused. And so where we've seen our ability to kind of create SWAT teams to really get that bespoke, who has that exact relationship at Sephora, or who's built that brand in Asia, and who's worked closely with that particular manufacturer, product developer, whatever it may be that you need at that time. And so it's like a two-sided marketplace to a certain degree, but it's really something that I wished I had. So I was the CEO at Violet Grey for 3 years, and there's a moment when you look around and you're about to do the next thing, and you're like, we don't have anybody here that does that. And so when you have those talent gaps and you have that choice to determine, you can get someone kind of punching above their weight and start calling labs, or you can hire for something you're not quite sure, is that where we're going, is that the right way, or you can outsource that talent, and then you need to trust where you're going, and we would all just turn and call our friends. And so the idea from the board was to be that trusted phone call so that you get that talent at that time. That really comes in as a thought partner and a peer, but also as an executor, because we all know no one just needs a strategy. They need help really executing against that.
Yeah. So, Scott, you've founded and scaled a number of brands, and I know how you think. You look for athletes. But, in your businesses, you also had the perspective of, kind of the idea of outsourcing. And so sort of from the days of when you launched Free, sort of in the 90s, early 2000s,
Don't age me.
what's the most significant change you've seen in what it takes to build a team and attract talent?
Well, I look at this from a couple of different perspectives, and that first brand back in 2003 really informed that perspective. And yes, the Michael Jordan analogy, hire the athlete. So the big rethink, I think, is to understand what these businesses really are. Most brands are marketing, sales, and product design entities. You don't even make a lot of product anymore. It's all outsourced. And so those become the high-value focal points for how you think about staffing the organization, right? And so from that perspective, that's where I think teams really need to focus. And then for the low-value activities, albeit the critical ones, finance, operations, you want to find the right balance of holistic resources that support that ambition that the brand has, but also supports and integrates with those other high-value resources so that you create one sort of highly efficient, focused organization.
So, I think as a founder, our first inclination, especially when we're first getting started, it's that sort of chief cook and bottle washer mentality. And sometimes it's really hard to break that. It's this, I can't afford it, but it's also at the same time, it's like you can't afford not to sort of free up your time. And being able to build a team can very literally be the difference between success and failure. Because founders don't build businesses alone, they have the idea, but it's really the team that they put around them that sort of fuels the growth. I think it is, while businesses have shifted, they scale fast, changes, it changes the kind of talent you need. And also, constantly looking for talent is not sustainable. Most small businesses don't have full-time HR. That's where sort of the agencies come in and the headhunters. But it's also a really tight labor market, especially sort of at that executive level when you need really senior leadership when your business is growing. And that can be a significant investment. And I think also a lot of times, brands make the investment and then it doesn't work out. And that can be a financial hit, sometimes it does. So it's kind of scary to go from that kind of doing it all to then sort of delegating and trusting someone sort of with your baby, so to speak. April, when we discussed on our prep call, we all agreed sort of the difficulty and expense. But you also pointed out that brands have access to talent in a way that they never have before.
Yep.
So what did you mean by that?
I mean, we all saw what COVID did to geography and talent, and it also pushed a lot of talent into this fractional market where there was a big quality of life assessment and, am I really happy where I am? And that, to me, was this impetus for the board, which, funny enough, seeds were planted many years before when I just saw how siloed companies were building and no one was sharing information and no one was really helping each other, especially in fashion, very gated, because your growth trajectory is based on your knowledge and your network, and so everyone's very protective. And I think COVID showed us how connected we all are, and it really kind of blew the doors open on this generosity and ambition, being able to live, mutually exclusive, or no longer mutually exclusive. And so by now having this flood of talent into the space, with this connection of just really wanting to help and have impact, everything changed. The scarcity of jobs changed. If you lived in New York, these were the paths and these were the companies you could work at. And if you lived in LA, and then all of a sudden, that is now everywhere. As we know, founders and brands are being built across the country. And so for me, the idea of making that investment, people are willing to do a fractional job, which is more affordable. You're getting a fraction of their time for a fraction of the price, but you're getting their 20 years of expertise and their network and their Rolodex and so much more value than that same money going to a junior person full-time. And so once companies kind of make that realization, and then you can try before you buy, and to me that's a big piece of starting fractionally. And I started as a consultant at Violet Grey before I took the full-time role, and make sure it's a fit on both sides, especially before you get into equity contracts and giving away a piece of your company. I think it's just so important to make sure it's a fit. And people are much more open to that now than I think they ever were before, because of that sense of I'm plotting my course and this has to look good on my resume for X amount of years. And that's really been blown out of the water. And these the legacy companies are still kind of stuck there. I talked to the talent team at the Gap the other week, and I was just like, oh, that world is so not how it should be anymore. In terms of like how we think about talent. And you have all these emerging brands that are building on lean teams, with real executors, and can be a lot more nimble and stealth by being able to leverage, this upper funnel of talent.
Yeah. I mean, Scott, you sort of have honed in on a solution for operations and finance, which I think is one of those things that you don't want a lot of turnover, and you really need a knowledge base for, because a lot of founders tend to lean creative, but it is sort of, especially in times like now, which are kind of uncertain with the election, it's hard to access capital. Like CFOs are the superheroes in these times, and accessing and managing that talent. I think you can get the talent, but managing them when you don't really know what you're managing is also sort of a challenge. What advice would you give, and how do you approach this? Because you've always sort of outsourced that.
Well,
then you bought the company.
Right. I actually was a client, scaled my own brand quite substantially, and the guy running the outsourced finance and ops business came to me one day and said, I'm leaving my partner, will you come as a client? I said, no, I'm coming as an owner. Because I wanted to build more brands, and what I learned was didn't matter how good the brand was, how good times were, if I didn't have the expertise, the quarterback, the day in and day out synergy between finance and operations, which is so intertwined in these businesses. Like, as good as it could be one day, it could totally fall apart the next day. And we had, sales went through the roof, but then we had global recalls, and who knows how to deal with a global recall? I mean, does anyone in this room know how to deal with a global recall? Right? I mean, so there's the point, but it can happen quickly. And so my orientation to this always is that, yes, you need a good product, but if you don't have a great handle and great resources to manage the business from a finance and ops perspective, I don't know what you're doing. You shouldn't be in business, because in the end, that's what you're building. You're building a business. And it's actually quite striking to me how many investors make an investment into a brand without the teams actually being present to support founders in a continuum day in and day out. And so while you don't necessarily have to go staff finance and ops, and chances are you wouldn't know where to start, there are options out there in order to get that expertise and resource in your business. The key is to make sure that finance is synergizing with operations. Both of these two things they work together, they work in lockstep. One doesn't work without the other. A fractional CFO over to the left that's not connected to finance is not going to be an effective strategist or a quarterback to help run the business. Because what happens in a collaborative session is not what goes on in the day-to-day, and then it hits operations and things get very complex very quickly. So long story short, my advice is get it in place, stat before you start, and maybe think about not starting if you don't have it in place.
So, Meloney, this generation entering the workforce today is unlike previous generations. I had the pleasure of spending a week at SCAD with the senior class, who we hired one. She's here, and she's a rock star. But even how you guys are teaching is different. You create these real-world scenarios that when they go into the workforce, they're sort of fully formed. But with that, I think we, as business owners, need to know how to leverage their talent because their skills are so different. Like, what is the best way, for a company to think about integrating a Gen Z just out of college into your business, because they just think about the world differently.
They do. They think about the world the way that it should be, and there's definitely nothing wrong with it. Now, I'm sure many of you in the audience are just like, well, actually, I have investors that I need to pay back, and I have, deadlines and everything I need to meet. Do I have time to deal with this? And what I would say to you is to think about it a little bit differently, because they have different motivations. They're not motivated by money. That's not interesting to them, because they can go and Uber on the weekend. They can make up for it with a gig or a hustle on the side. So they want to do what they're passionate. They need to believe in what they're doing. So that the little bit of extra time you explain to them why they're unpacking boxes and getting coffee for you, and how that fits into the larger organization, just a little second, may help. And I think what we do that's special at SCAD is you have to realize, you don't need to listen to anyone anymore. I can go on the internet, ChatGPT, I can find out whatever I want. What we're doing for students is we're curating an experience to give them hands-on learning opportunities, and that's how you get good, and providing them with a safe space to fail fast but fail forward, and to be successful, to pick themselves up and build resiliency. You'll see in a very short term that they really hit the ground running with that. So I don't think that they look for anything different than we want. I just think that we just can't assume that they automatically know everything. And it's hard because they're so good at social. They're good at all the technology. They seem so brilliant. But you also have to remember, I tell people all the time, they're 20 years old. Yeah. They haven't experienced. And then a lot of them haven't even matriculated off of Zoom. So, there takes a little bit of time. So I just, that understanding is helpful.
Yeah.
Fair.
April, one of the things that in this kind of the landscape that moves so fast, I mean, like a year ago, TikTok shops just launched, right? None of us knew anything about that, and now all of a sudden we all have to be experts on it. And this kind of creates, on some level, like a moving target, but we're working against an antiquated org chart. And trying to kind of put a square peg in a round hole and for some reason it feels like everything is the CMO's responsibility these days. And when I have people come to me who's like, I'm looking for a CMO who can do like, this laundry list. I'm like, good luck. They don't exist. But it's a challenge. I mean, how would you approach if someone came to you filling positions that may not live on an org chart, or filling a role like a CMO that is, before, CMO is the person in the C-suite that spent all the money.
Yep.
And now they actually have a seat at the table because they drive so much revenue.
Yep.
I mean, the role has fundamentally changed.
And it means a lot of different things to different people. You can be a performance-based CMO, you can be a creative CMO, and I think just the idea of titles is really antiquated in that sense of YSC versus a VP versus a SR, whatever that is. It's really like, what are the skills that person has? And so this happens so many times. And I think I've probably talked to 400 brands in the last 3.5 years, and maybe 900 consultants, truly. And where they struggle is this space of, I can be a generalist and I do all these things, but this is the one thing, and trying to match that up with a title where brands often know they need help and they don't know what they need. So they'll call me and they'll be like, I need a CMO. And then after, some time on the phone, they really need crisis PR, someone to help them with their Amazon business and audit their website. I'm like, none of that is a CMO. But in their mind, that's marketing, and so it's really just like, what? And so I go back to just what's the problem? And instead of trying to put a title on it right away, it's like, what is the work that needs to be done? What's the biggest pain point? And even then, a lot of times the pain is over here. Let's say it's social, and so we bring in a social strategist, but they get in there and it's actually way over here and it's brand. The story's not strong. They don't really have the messaging right. The content's not right. And so social's not working because here is actually where the challenge is. And it's really hard to stop and say, like, I need an assessment. I need a bit of a diagnosis. And yet, as humans, when things start to go wrong, we're like, I need to figure out why I'm coughing so much. Is it COVID or is there something else? And so there's that moment of just kind of taking a beat, which I think is so powerful with somebody objective who has no skin in the game other than to help. You look at your business who's been there. And so we try and kind of start there at the board to really make sure, number one, we're scoping the right thing at the right time and they're not putting money behind something that's premature. And it's a little bit of brand therapy at the end of the day because you're so in it and you're moving so fast. And in that seat, when I was at Violet Grey, you're managing up to investors, you're managing down to your team. It can be a really tough spot to be that sole decision maker. And so bringing in some peers that are really there as thought leaders to really help you see what you don't see, and then make sure to kind of get you on the right path is where I've found we can bring a lot of value at this level. And then the point you were saying of just constantly like, oh my gosh, now it's TikTok shops, now it's AI, now it's, it's like this just relentless pace of which we're all navigating. And ultimately, it's really hard to be running a company, upskilling yourself all the time, upskilling your team all the time. And so again, it's a place for specialized talent to come in to look at, like, can AI help us with more efficiencies? Like, do we need to take a minute and kind of assess supply chain, like, or whatever that may be? And so, again, this talent pool is there, and they are constantly upskilling because they know, I'm 57, and I'm like, what's the next 15 years look like? None of us are not looking at the long game. And the world of consultants where they used to be, they're expensive and they don't do anything, or they come in and they really destroy culture. The experts are now here and everyone's like, great. And so, how does this really work in this new age of this talent shift and where people are now looking for connection and humanity and all the things and helping companies? And I really see this as a palpable shift than it used to be super rigid and hierarchied and pay your dues and crawl your way. Like, this generation you're talking about does not operate that way at all. I was talking to someone earlier about, the hours we used to put in and the coffee cups being thrown at our heads, and we've all survived a lot of crazy companies, and now they're merging in a way where this multi-generational opportunity to have leadership come in with what they know, work with the talent that is completely different, in a digital native world, and help each other upskill. And I think that that's something that we're going to see, get closer and closer. But it's up to the leadership at the companies to kind of rethink.
No, I mean, it brings up a good point because I've thought about this for a number of years, that really the competitive edge for brands is going to be those that can really build cross-generational
Yep.
teams, where you can have sort of someone right out of school with someone who is sort of like, maybe thinking of working less, but you're all at the table solving problems and there are no eye rolls.
Yep.
And I think like how,
Got to remove the ego on the upper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think, both of you sort of represent sort of the well, not all the way, the one end of the spectrum. April, I don't want to age you. But seriously, how would you advise, Melanie, like how do we create these cultures? Because it requires us to rethink
Totally.
how we approach things.
I mean, working in higher education is a breath of fresh air. To be around, to have access to so much technology, multi-generational talent. Everyone who reports to me is actually older than me. And then I'm also teaching super young students, but none of that crosses our mind. Like that's just not even in our headspace when we work together. So just to give you an example, at SCAD, we often will go to industry and say, what is an issue that the industry hasn't solved, and what could we work on as a research project? So one project we had was, this generation's not driving. They're not getting driver's license. How can we make it fun? Because the automotive business is just going to go away if people don't drive, right? And so we were thinking about coming up with an idea. Well, we actually went out to industry. We pulled in professors from animation, gaming, industrial design, film, television, social strategy and management, and students from user experience, all of it, and 3D printed a car in 3 months. I remember it taking 2 years to bring a product to life in beauty. And the way that we all come together, I think it's an inspiration. But what happened is we removed egos from decision making. And that is necessary, and making sure that we keep the consumer first. And it's not about, it's my idea or my title, that it's about the consumer and meeting the need. And then a lot of it goes away, I saw.
Yeah.
Genius.
So this is running out of time fast here. One last question, and then we'll open it up. But historically companies were designed, or the thought was they were designed to optimize productivity, and that happened when everyone was in the office. Then COVID happened, and it forced us to experiment with remote work at scale, and for the first time. And now we're seeing some businesses flourish. So there are some businesses that are 100% remote. I haven't been able to wrap my brain around how to do that. While others are slowly moving back to 5 days. I suppose the reality is most of us are somewhere in the middle. But I'd love to know, from your perspective, like where do you think we're headed with how we work and how we build teams? Scott, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're 50 people supporting, dozens and dozens of brands, and historically our model for over 20 years has been remote, right? And we're operating like an integrated part of the team. And so watching what's happened over the past couple of years, I mean, my honest sense is whatever's working for the organization is what should work. Should be flexibility, like literally, if whatever that answer is it hybrid, is it in the office, is it remote, is really going to be the answer for that company.
Yeah. I mean, Melanie, one of the things that was interesting to me when I met with some of the students and they were looking for jobs, my first question was, are you willing to work remote, or do you want to be in an office? And
God,
all of them wanted to be in an office, and I was really shocked.
Yes. I think this is nuanced conversation, and I think it depends on like what you're working on. If you have a team of finance people who are like in Excel all day, you may not need them to come to the office. But I think there's a nice mix of, if you're doing day-to-day office things, putting now in your calendar team work sessions where you actually meet in person. And this may be like, 2 days every month or something, but making the in-person very strategic and making it intentional. And I think that's where we're going to end up eventually, because the convenience outweighs the inconvenience sometimes with Zoom.
I mean, April, you see and touch a lot of businesses. Where do you see it going?
You know, I think the first time career, they should be in an office. You know, it's so, I mean, I had friends whose daughters were like in the mailroom at CAA virtually. I'm like, how are you in the mailroom at CAA? Like, never met their boss. They were there for 3 years. They had never actually met their boss in person, and they lived in LA. You know, and it was just, it was kind of bonkers. And then we work with the tech company called ShopMy. I've been working with them for the last year, and I had a drink with one of the 24-year-old girls, and they're building an office in New York, and she's like, we cannot wait. Like, we're dying to get back in, because that water cooler talk, those little nuances that you get a visibility into something, you know, it's really hard to see what's happening in the other areas if you're all, you know, in your own meetings. And then I think we're, you know, the generation who's been in offices for 20 years is so done in that sense. And so for them to SWAT team in and to go when they need to, and, you know, it's I think it's going to be a blend for sure. Yeah. And again, depending if you're on design and if you're really hands-on, it's a whole other thing. But I think that is just so formative. You know, I can't imagine starting a career and not ever being in an office with the people I'm, you know, building my initial bonds with. You know, I see people that I've known for decades in this industry still, and it wouldn't be the same if I never hung out with them in person.
I mean, it's how you build your network at the end of the
completely.
day.
Completely.
So we have time for a couple questions. Does anyone have questions? We do. There's one right here.
Hi, my question's for anybody on the panel who wants to tackle it, but you know, as we found businesses and try and create culture, have you seen anything that, as fractional consultants, is working for companies and budding brands where they can create culture in interesting ways and bring people in who aren't coming into the office and get them to be part of the network and feel attached? I'm wondering if there's any creativity, what you've been seeing in that space to build culture these days.
I mean, the way that we work from a process perspective ingrains us into the culture of the organization. So the goal is that we actually become so integrated, even though we're fractional, we're so integrated that, you know, we're building relationships. We're becomes personal. We take on the mission of the brand. You know, and that's the only way that it works is pure connectivity, irrespective of the business model of the relationship.
Anyone else? Well, I know everyone is going to be here. Also, I'm going to give a call out to SCAD because Meloney has some great students from last year's class that are still looking. And the students now are contemplating their internships for the summer. And I can't say enough about the program there, so I'm sure she would be happy to speak to you.